I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my graduation cap for the 100th time. My hands were trembling, not from nerves about the ceremony, but from excitement about finally having my moment. After 10 years of night classes, working double shifts, and putting everyone else first, I was graduating. Me, Jessica, the girl who always stood in the shadows of her husband's success. "You look perfect," Sandra said, appearing behind me with a champagne flute, "though I still think we should have gone with the sparkly heels." I laughed, glancing down at my sensible black pumps. "These'll do just fine. I don't want to trip walking across the stage. Brandon's going to be so proud." She squeezed my shoulder. "Speaking of which, where is that workaholic husband of yours?" "Surgery ran late," I said, checking my phone again. No messages. But he promised he'd make it to the party afterward. The graduation ceremony passed in a blur of speeches and name-calling. When they announced Jessica Mitchell, I walked across that stage with my head held high, thinking about all those nights I'd spent studying after closing the diner, all those promotions I'd turned down so we could stay near Brandon's residency program. Before we continue, quick question. Where has this story found you today? Let us know your location in the comments below. Now, let's continue. The party at our house was Sandra's idea. She'd transformed our backyard into a twinkling wonderland, with fairy lights strung between trees and champagne flowing freely. Friends, family, and colleagues from both the diner and my new job at the investment firm filled the space with laughter and congratulations. "There's my graduate." Brandon's voice boomed across the yard as he finally arrived, still in his scrubs. He looked exhausted but handsome as ever, that same charm that had won me over 12 years ago, still evident in his smile. "Sorry I'm late, babe. Emergency appendectomy." I wrapped my arms around him, breathing in the familiar hospital antiseptic smell. "You're here now. That's all that matters. Actually," he pulled away, glancing nervously around the crowd, "there's something I need to tell you, something important." My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when telling me we had to move across the country for his residency. "Can it wait?" I gestured to our guests. "We're celebrating." "No," he cut me off, raising his voice slightly. "It can't wait. I've been seeing someone." The party chatter died down. I could feel eyes turning toward us, could hear Sandra's sharp intake of breath somewhere behind me. "What?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Her name is Trinity. She's a resident at the hospital." Brandon ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tick I'd found endearing once. "We've been together for 6 months. I'm leaving you for her." The silence that followed was deafening. Someone dropped a glass, the sharp crack against the patio tiles making me flinch. 6 months, I repeated, my mind racing through all those late nights, all those emergency surgeries. While I was finishing my degree, while I was still working 60-hour weeks to pay off your student loans. "I'm sorry," he said, but his eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on something, someone, behind me. I turned to see a young woman in designer clothes, looking uncomfortable but determined. Trinity. She'd been at my graduation party the whole time. "You brought her here?" The words came out as a snarl. "To my graduation party?" "I thought it would be better to be honest," Brandon said, reaching for Trinity's hand. "To start fresh." Sandra appeared at my side, her arm around my shoulders. "You need to leave, both of you, now." But I couldn't let him go. Not like this, not after everything. 10 years, I said, my voice rising. "I gave you 10 years of my life. I worked at that diner until my feet bled to put you through med school. I moved across the country, away from my family, for your career. And this is how you repay me?" "Jessica," he started, but I was beyond hearing excuses. "Get out," I screamed, grabbing the nearest champagne glass and hurling it at his feet. The splash caught Trinity's expensive shoes, making her jump back with a yelp. As they hurried away, the party dissolved into chaos. People started gathering their things, making awkward excuses. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching my perfect night crumble around me. "I've got you," Sandra whispered, holding me up as my knees threatened to buckle. "Let them go. We'll figure this out." But as I watched Brandon help Trinity into his car, the car I'd helped him pick out last year, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about a failed marriage or a public humiliation. This was about justice, about consequences. I straightened my shoulders, wiping away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "You're right, Sandra. We will figure this out, but not the way Brandon expects." The fairy lights continued to twinkle overhead, mocking what should have been my triumph. But as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of my celebration, I made a promise to myself. This wouldn't be the end of my story. It would be the beginning. The morning after my disastrous graduation party, I sat at our shared home office, staring at Brandon's laptop. He'd left it behind in his hurry to escape with Trinity. 10 years of marriage, and he couldn't even remember to grab his computer. "You should eat something," Sandra said, placing a mug of coffee beside me. She'd stayed the night, sleeping on the couch after helping me clean up the aftermath of the party. "I can't," I replied, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Not until I figure out what else he's been hiding." "Jessica," Sandra's voice held a warning note. "Don't." I took a deep breath. "Just don't. You know what's funny? He never changed his password. It's still the date we met." The laptop came to life, revealing dozens of open tabs, patient records, email chains, bank statements. My financial analyst brain kicked into gear as I started scanning the numbers. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, pulling up our joint account. He's been transferring large sums to an account I've never seen before. Sandra leaned over my shoulder. "Maybe it's for the hospital?" "No." I shook my head, my hands shaking as I dug deeper. "These transfers started 6 months ago, the same time he started seeing her." The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Sandra went to answer it while I continued searching through files. "Jessica?" A familiar voice called out. "It's Eduardo from the hospital. I need to talk to you." Eduardo, Brandon's colleague and friend, stood in our living room looking uncomfortable in his casual clothes. I'd always liked him. He was one of the few doctors who treated me like a person, not just Brandon's wife. "If you're here to defend him," I started. "I'm not," he cut me off. "I'm here because I think you need to know something about Trinity." I gestured for him to sit down. He perched on the edge of our couch, the one Brandon and I had picked out together last spring. "She's not just a resident," Eduardo said, running his hands through his hair. "She's the daughter of the hospital board chairman. Brandon's been, let's say he's been climbing the ladder faster than usual since they got together." My laugh came out bitter. "So he traded up. Got himself a younger model with better connections." "It's more complicated than that." Eduardo glanced at Sandra, who was hovering protectively nearby. "There have been rumors about missing prescription pads, about procedures being signed off without proper oversight. I've tried looking into it, but every time I get close, the investigations disappear." My hands clenched into fists. "And let me guess, Trinity's father makes sure everything stays buried?" Eduardo nodded. "Brandon's always been ambitious, but lately, look, I probably shouldn't be here, but you were always good to me, Jessica. You deserve to know what's really going on." After Eduardo left, I returned to the laptop with renewed purpose. Every file, every email, every transaction. I combed through them all with the same attention to detail that had earned me my recent promotion. "Here," I said finally, pointing to a series of transactions. "Look at these payments. They're coded as consulting fees, but they're going to offshore accounts. and the dates match up with some of the procedures Eduardo mentioned. Sandra squeezed my shoulder. What are you going to do? First, I said, plugging in my USB drive. I'm going to make copies of everything. Then I'm going to find out exactly what my dear husband has been up to at that hospital. My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. Need my laptop for work. Dropping by to pick it up. Perfect timing, I muttered, quickly finishing the file transfer. Sandra, would you mind making yourself scarce? I need to handle this alone. 20 minutes later, Brandon walked in using his key. He looked different somehow, sharper, colder, like a mask had slipped away. Where is it? He demanded, not even bothering with hello. I gestured to the laptop on the coffee table, right where you left it, along with your integrity, apparently. He froze. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing, I said, keeping my voice light. Just wondering how many prescription pads it takes to buy Trinity those designer shoes she was wearing last night. The color drained from his face. You've been going through my files? Funny thing about being a financial analyst, I said, standing up. We're really good at following money trails. And yours, Brandon? They lead to some very interesting places. He grabbed the laptop, clutching it to his chest. You don't know what you're talking about. And even if you did, no one would believe you over me. I'm a respected surgeon. For now, I replied, watching him back toward the door. But respect is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Like trust or marriage vows. After he left, I sat down heavily on the couch, my hands shaking. Sandra emerged from the kitchen, her face concerned. Are you okay? I nodded slowly, a plan already forming in my mind. I will be, but first, I need to make a call to someone named Helen Graham. According to these emails, she's been asking some very interesting questions about Brandon's department. The game was on, and this time, I wasn't playing by anyone else's rules. The hospital lobby felt different now. For years, I'd walked these halls proudly as Brandon's wife, but today I moved like a ghost, watching the staff hurry past with new eyes. Every friendly smile, every casual greeting. I wondered who else had known about Brandon and Trinity while I remained oblivious. Can I help you? The receptionist's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Yes, I'm here to see Dr. Helen Graham. Do you have an appointment? No, but I leaned closer, lowering my voice. Could you tell her it's about Dr. Brandon Mitchell and some concerning financial discrepancies? The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. She picked up her phone, speaking in hushed tones. Within minutes, a security guard appeared to escort me to Helen's office. Helen Graham wasn't what I expected. Instead of the stern administrator I'd imagined, I found a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a streak of silver in her dark hair. She stood as I entered, gesturing for the security guard to leave. Jessica, she said, not a question. I've been wondering when you'd show up. I placed my USB drive on her desk. I have something you might want to see. Helen's expression remained neutral as she plugged in the drive and began reviewing the files. Only the occasional tightening around her eyes betrayed her reaction to what she was seeing. How long have you known? I asked, breaking the silence. About Trinity. A few months. Helen looked up, her gaze sharp. About the other things? I've had suspicions for longer, but Brandon is protected by Trinity's father. Among others, Helen leaned back in her chair. The hospital board isn't interested in scandal, especially not with our upcoming merger. What if they didn't have a choice? I pulled out a second USB drive. This one contains copies of everything: the unauthorized prescriptions, the fraudulent billing, the offshore accounts. One click, and it all goes to every major news outlet in the city. Helen's eyebrows shot up. That's quite a nuclear option you're holding. He humiliated me at my own graduation party, I said, my voice cracking slightly. After 10 years of sacrificing everything for him. And now you want revenge. It wasn't a question. I want justice. Helen stood, walking to her window. Below, I could see Brandon's reserved parking space, his luxury car gleaming in the sunlight. Did you know, Helen said, still looking out, that I was the one who recommended Brandon for his residency here? I saw such promise in him, brilliant surgeon, natural leader, but somewhere along the way, he started believing his own hype. She turned back to face me. What exactly are you proposing? I need access to the hospital's internal audit records, I said, and any complaints that might have been buried about Brandon's department. That's highly confidential information. So is writing prescriptions for non-existent patients. A ghost of a smile crossed Helen's face. You're not what I expected, Jessica. Brandon always portrayed you as simple, the devoted wife working her way through community college. Brandon sees what he wants to see. I stood, smoothing my skirt. I'm giving you a chance to clean house quietly, Dr. Graham. Help me expose Brandon's misconduct through proper channels, or I'll do it my way. And Trinity's father, the board, they'll fight back. Let them try. I placed my business card on her desk. I didn't spend 10 years analyzing financial records for nothing. As I turned to leave, Helen called out, "Wait." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick file. These are the complaints I've collected over the past year, the ones that never made it to official review. I reached for the file, but she held it back. Before you take this, understand something. Once you start down this path, there's no going back. People will get hurt, not just Brandon and Trinity, but others, innocent people who trusted him. Like I trusted him? Revenge might feel good in the moment, Jessica, but it leaves scars on everyone involved, including the person seeking it. I thought about the night of my graduation, about the look in Brandon's eyes as he chose Trinity over our decade together. Some scars are worth it. Helen handed me the file. I'll help you, but on one condition. We do this right, by the book. No leaked documents to the press, no nuclear options. Deal? I took the file, feeling its weight, the weight of decisions and consequences yet to come. Deal. As I left the hospital, my phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. Brandon's moving his things out of the house tomorrow. Want company? I looked down at the file in my hands, then back at my phone. No thanks, I've got work to do. That night, I spread Helen's documents across my dining room table, creating a web of Post-it notes and highlighter marks. Each complaint, each discrepancy, each covered-up mistake, they were all pieces of a puzzle I was finally starting to see clearly. Brandon had always said I was good at putting things together. Time to prove him right. 3 more complaints came in this morning, Helen said, sliding a manila envelope across her desk. All from nurses who worked with Brandon last year. They were too afraid to speak up before, but now... I nodded, adding the new statements to my growing file. 2 weeks had passed since our first meeting, and the evidence against Brandon was mounting faster than either of us had expected. Have you seen him? Helen asked, studying my face. Only from a distance. He's moved in with Trinity at her father's beach house. I forced a smile. Very romantic. Jessica, Helen's voice softened. Are you sure you want to continue with this? The hospital board meets next week. Once we present our findings, there's no turning back. Before I could answer, her office door burst open. Brandon stood there, his surgical scrubs wrinkled, his face flushed with anger. What the hell are you doing? He demanded, storming toward me. The nursing staff is refusing to work with me. My patients are requesting transfers. Even Eduardo won't return my calls. Helen rose from her chair. Dr. Mitchell, this is highly inappropriate. Save it, he snapped, then turned back to me. Is this your revenge? Turning my own mentor against me? Poisoning my reputation? I met his gaze steadily. Your reputation? You mean the one you built on falsified records and buried complaints? You don't understand. He lowered his voice, glancing nervously at Helen. The things I did, I had to. Do you know how competitive this field is? How hard it is to stand out? Actually, Helen interrupted, I do. I've been standing out in this field for 30 years without compromising my ethics. Brandon ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Helen, please, you've been like a mother to me. Don't let her do this. I'm not doing anything, I said, standing up. These complaints, they're real people, Brandon. Patients who trusted you, nurses who tried to speak up. You did this to yourself. What about Trinity? He asked desperately. Her father can't protect you anymore? Helen finished. The board meeting next week isn't just about you, Brandon. It's about the entire culture of cover-ups and corruption. Your relationship with Trinity just helped us connect the dots. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. Jess, baby, please. We can work this out. I made a mistake. Don't. My voice cracked. Don't you dare try to manipulate me. Not after everything. Fine. His face hardened. You want to play hardball? Remember who I am in this town. Remember who Trinity's father is. You really think anyone will believe the bitter ex-wife over me? They'll believe the evidence, Helen said quietly. And the witnesses. How many more do you think will come forward once they know they're not alone? Brandon's pager went off, making us all jump. He checked it, swearing under his breath. This isn't over, he warned, backing toward the door. You have no idea what you're getting into. After he left, I sank back into my chair, my hands shaking. Helen poured 2 glasses of water, adding a splash of something stronger to mine. Drink, she ordered. Then we'll talk. I took a sip, feeling the burn of alcohol. He's right, you know, about Trinity's father. He won't go down without a fight. No, Helen agreed, he won't. Which is why we need to be absolutely certain about every detail before the board meeting. She paused, studying me. There's something else you should know. She pulled up an email on her computer, turning the screen so I could see. Eduardo sent this morning. He's been doing some digging of his own. Apparently, Brandon's been writing prescriptions for Trinity's father's private medical practice. Medications that never made it to actual patients. My breath caught. You mean? Drug trafficking, Helen confirmed. Clean, respectable, hidden behind a veneer of legitimate medical practice. That's why Trinity's father has been so protective. Brandon's not just dating his daughter, he's part of the operation. I felt the room spin slightly. This is bigger than I thought, more dangerous, which is why I'm giving you one last chance to walk away, Helen said gently. We have enough to stop Brandon's medical career. We could leave it at that. I thought about the night of my graduation, about all those years of sacrifice, about the patients who had suffered because of Brandon's choices. No, I said firmly. We finished this, all of it. Helen nodded, a hint of pride in her eyes. Then we'd better get back to work. The board meeting is in 6 days, and we need everything to be perfect. As we bent over the files, sorting through evidence and testimony, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Brandon was right. I had no idea what I was getting into. But for the first time in years, I was fighting for something bigger than myself. And this time, I wasn't going to lose. You need to see this, Sandra said, bursting into my apartment without knocking. She thrust her phone at me, displaying a local news website. The headline made my stomach drop. Prominent surgeon alleges harassment campaign by ex-wife. I scanned the article, my hands growing cold. Brandon had given an interview, painting himself as the victim of a vengeful ex-spouse who couldn't accept the end of their marriage. He'd even managed to work in mentions of my unstable behavior at the graduation party. That manipulative bastard, I muttered, tossing the phone aside. He's trying to get ahead of the story before the board meeting. There's more, Sandra said, pulling up another article. Trinity's father is quoted here, defending Brandon's exemplary record and suggesting an internal investigation into Helen's conduct. My phone rang, Helen's number flashing on the screen. "Have you seen?" she started. "The articles? Yeah, just now." I put her on speaker. "What do we do?" "Meet me at Eduardo's place in an hour," Helen said. "And Jessica, be careful. I think we're being watched." Sandra insisted on driving me to Eduardo's apartment. The whole way there, I kept checking the rearview mirror, paranoid about every car that stayed behind us for more than a few blocks. Eduardo's place was a small walk-up in a quiet neighborhood. Helen was already there when we arrived, along with 3 nurses I recognized from the hospital. "These are the witnesses who agreed to go on record," Helen explained, introducing them. "Maria, Rachel, and Diane. They've all documented instances of Brandon's misconduct. And we're all probably going to lose our jobs," Maria said grimly. "Trinity's father has friends on every hospital board in the city." "No, you won't," I promised, though my voice shook slightly. "We have evidence of retaliation against whistleblowers. That's another federal offense." Eduardo emerged from his kitchen with coffee for everyone. "The board meeting's been moved up," he announced, "tomorrow morning instead of next week." "What?" Helen stood up. "They can't do that. We need more time to—" "They're trying to catch us unprepared," I realized. "Rush this through before we can organize our evidence properly." "It gets worse," Eduardo continued. "I overheard Trinity's father on the phone. They're planning to discredit Helen first, suggest she's been targeting Brandon out of professional jealousy." Helen laughed bitterly. "Professional jealousy? I trained him. Everything he knows about surgery, he learned from me." "They're scared," I said, spreading our evidence files across Eduardo's coffee table. "Which means we're close to something big. Maria, those prescriptions you mentioned, when exactly did they start?" We worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. Each piece of evidence was reviewed, each testimony practiced and refined. Around midnight, Sandra returned with takeout and fresh concerns. "Someone broke into your apartment," she said quietly, pulling me aside. "Nothing was taken, but your files were clearly searched." My hands started shaking. "Did you call the police?" "Of course. They took a report, but—" She shrugged helplessly. "Let me guess. The responding officer was friends with Trinity's father?" "This is getting dangerous, Jessica." Sandra grabbed my arm. "Maybe you should back off. Let the medical board handle it through official channels." "The medical board?" Maria scoffed from across the room. "They're as corrupt as the hospital administration. No offense, Dr. Graham." Helen waved off the apology. "She's right. The whole system is compromised. That's why we need to do this right." I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. A car was parked across the road, its occupants barely visible in the darkness. As I watched, it pulled away slowly. "They're trying to intimidate us," I said, turning back to the group. "Scare us into backing down. But here's what they don't understand. I'm not doing this for revenge anymore." "You're not?" Eduardo asked. "No." I picked up one of the patient complaints, a woman who'd suffered complications after Brandon rushed through her surgery. "I'm doing this because it's right. Because every person in this room has sacrificed something to be here, to tell the truth." Helen smiled, that hint of pride back in her eyes. "Then let's give them hell tomorrow." We worked for several more hours, organizing our presentation for the board. Around 3 a.m., as the others were gathering their things to leave, Helen pulled me aside. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "I want you to know something. Brandon was wrong about you. You're not just the bitter ex-wife. You're the person who finally had the courage to stand up and say, 'Enough.'" I hugged her impulsively, surprising us both. "Thank you for everything." As Sandra drove me home in the pre-dawn darkness, I thought about Brandon's threat in Helen's office. You have no idea what you're getting into. He was right. I hadn't known what I was getting into. But now that I was here, there was no turning back. Tomorrow would change everything, for better or worse. The hospital boardroom felt like a courtroom, with Trinity's father presiding at the head of the table like a judge. Brandon sat to his right, Trinity beside him, both wearing expressions of practiced concern. The other board members filled the remaining seats, their faces carefully neutral. Helen and I sat opposite them, our evidence spread before us like armor. The three nurses, Maria, Rachel, and Diane, waited outside, ready to testify. Eduardo had positioned himself near the door, watching everyone's reactions. Before we begin, Trinity's father said, his voice smooth as oil, I want to note for the record that this meeting was called under irregular circumstances. Irregular circumstances require irregular measures, Helen replied coolly. Shall we begin with the prescription records, or would you prefer to start with the patient complaints? Brandon shifted in his seat. I could see sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Dr. Graham, one of the board members spoke up, these are serious allegations. If they prove unfounded, the consequences to your career. They're not unfounded, I interrupted, sliding copies of our evidence across the table. Everything in these folders is documented, verified, and witnessed. Trinity's father barely glanced at the papers. Ms. Mitchell, given your personal situation with Dr. Mitchell, perhaps you should recuse yourself from these proceedings. My personal situation is exactly why I'm qualified to be here, I said, standing up. I spent 10 years watching Brandon cut corners, bend rules, and justify his actions. The only difference is now I have proof. I walked around the table, distributing more documents. These are records of prescriptions written by Brandon for non-existent patients. The medications were diverted to private clinics owned by board member families. I paused beside Trinity's father. Including yours, sir. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trinity grabbed Brandon's arm, whispering something in his ear. This is absurd. Brandon stood up, his chair scraping back. These allegations are clearly the product of a vindictive ex-wife and a mentor who can't accept being surpassed by her student. Then you won't mind if we call in our witnesses? Helen asked. She nodded to Eduardo, who opened the door for the nurses. Maria spoke first, her voice steady as she described catching Brandon falsifying post-op reports. Rachel followed with accounts of missing medications. Diane detailed how she'd been threatened with termination when she tried to report Brandon's mistakes. Enough! Trinity's father slammed his hand on the table. This is nothing but hearsay and circumstantial evidence. Actually, Eduardo stepped forward. It's not. He pulled out his phone, playing a recording. Brandon's voice filled the room, clearly discussing prescription quantities with Trinity's father. The color drained from Brandon's face. You recorded me? Eduardo, you were my friend. I was your friend, Eduardo agreed, until I realized what you were doing to our patients. Trinity stood up suddenly. Daddy, we need to leave, now. Sit down, her father ordered, but she was already heading for the door. No, she said, turning back to face us all. I'm not going down for this. I'm not losing my medical license before I even finish my residency. Brandon reached for her. Trinity, baby, wait. Don't baby me, she snapped. You promised this would never come out. You promised my father would handle it. The board members were whispering among themselves now, papers rustling as they reviewed our evidence with new interest. Dr. Mitchell, one of them said, I think it's time you and your associates stepped out while we discuss this matter. This isn't over, Trinity's father warned as he stood. You have no idea the damage you've done. No, Helen replied calmly. The damage was done when you decided profits were more important than patients. They filed out, Brandon, Trinity, and her father, leaving us with the board. For the next 2 hours, we presented our case in detail. Every prescription, every complaint, every cover-up carefully documented and explained. When we finally emerged from the boardroom, Eduardo was waiting with news. "Trinity's gone," he said, cleaned out her locker and left. "Word is she's already contacted a lawyer about turning state's evidence." "And Brandon?" I asked. "Security's escorting him out now. The board called the DEA. They're on their way." I walked to the window, watching as Brandon was led to his car. He looked up, somehow sensing my presence, and our eyes met across the distance. For a moment, I saw the man I'd married. Brilliant, ambitious, and so certain he could never fail. Then he was gone, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow sort of exhaustion. Helen appeared beside me. "The board's suspending his license pending investigation. Trinity's father has been asked to resign." "What about the nurses? Protected under whistleblower statutes. They'll keep their jobs." She touched my arm gently. "You did good, Jessica." "We did good," I corrected. "But something tells me this isn't quite over." "No," Helen agreed, watching another car pull into the parking lot. This one marked with federal badges. "This is just the beginning of a much bigger storm." The DEA investigation moved faster than any of us expected. Within 2 weeks, Brandon's perfect life had completely unraveled. I watched it happen from a distance, through news reports and courthouse appearances, until the morning he showed up at my door. "5 minutes," he said, his designer suit replaced by jeans and a wrinkled shirt. "Please, Jessica, that's all I'm asking for." I should have shut the door in his face. Instead, I stepped aside, letting him enter the home we'd once shared. "You look terrible," I observed, noting the dark circles under his eyes and his unkempt hair. "Yeah, well, being indicted for drug trafficking will do that to you." He paced our living room like a caged animal. "Trinity's talking to the prosecutors. Her father's fled the country. Everything I built is just gone." "Everything you stole, you mean?" He stopped pacing, turning to face me. "I came to ask for your help." I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Are you serious?" "The prosecutors respect you. If you told them I was a good doctor, that I cared about my patients." "But you didn't care, Brandon. That's the point. You cared about money and status and impressing Trinity's father." "I cared about us," he shouted, making me flinch. "Everything I did, every corner I cut, it was to give us a better life." "Us?" I stepped closer, anger burning away my fear. "There hasn't been an us since you decided to humiliate me at my graduation party. Remember that? While I was celebrating finally getting my degree, you were planning your exit with your girlfriend." The doorbell rang, interrupting his response. Through the window, I saw Sandra and Eduardo on the porch, looking concerned. "Your timing's perfect," I called out, letting them in. "Brandon was just leaving." "Actually," Eduardo said, his expression grim, "we came to warn you. Trinity's been found dead in her apartment." The room went silent. Brandon staggered backward, collapsing onto the couch. "What?" he whispered. "How?" "Apparent overdose," Sandra said quietly. "But given everything that's happening—" "Her father," Brandon jumped up, running his hands through his hair. "He never forgave her for cooperating with the investigation." Oh God, what have I done? I watched my ex-husband crumble, all his arrogance and charm stripped away, leaving nothing but a scared man who'd played with forces he couldn't control. "You need to go to the police," Eduardo said. "Tell them everything you know about her father's operation." "I can't," Brandon's voice cracked. "He'll kill me too." "He'll kill you anyway," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "Your only chance is to tell the truth. For once in your life, Brandon, do the right thing." He looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Will you come with me? To the police station? Part of me wanted to refuse, to let him face this alone, like he'd left me to face my humiliation alone. But a larger part remembered the young doctor I'd fallen in love with, the man who'd once wanted to help people. Fine, I said, but not for you, for Trinity, and for all the patients you hurt along the way. The drive to the police station was silent. Sandra followed in her car, while Eduardo called Helen to update her. In the passenger seat, Brandon stared out the window, looking lost. I never meant for any of this to happen, he said finally. No one ever does, I replied. But we all make choices, Brandon, and then we have to live with them. At the station, I watched from behind a glass window as Brandon gave his statement. He told them everything about the prescription scheme, about Trinity's father's drug operation, about the threats and cover-ups. With each word, his shoulders seemed to sink lower. Helen arrived as he was finishing, pulling me into a fierce hug. Are you okay? No, I admitted, but I will be. Through the glass, I saw Brandon look up, his eyes meeting mine one last time. In that moment, I felt the last threads of our shared past finally break. You know what the worst part is? I said to Helen as we watched the officers lead Brandon away. I actually feel sorry for him. That's because you're not the person he thought you were, she replied. You're stronger than that. Outside the station, reporters were gathering, their cameras ready for the next chapter in the scandal. Sandra touched my arm gently. Ready to face them? I thought about the past few weeks, about revenge and justice, about choices and consequences, about the fine line between right and wrong. No, I said honestly. But that's never stopped me before. As we pushed through the media crowd, their questions blurring into white noise, I realized something. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted when I'd started down this path of revenge. It was messier, sadder, more complicated. But maybe that's what real justice looked like. Not a triumph, but a reckoning. The autumn breeze carried the scent of coffee from the hospital cafe as I sat with Helen, watching medical students hurry past with their textbooks and dreams. The board approved your proposal, Helen said, sliding a folder across the table. Full funding for the mentorship program. They're calling it Project Integrity. I opened the folder, scanning the official letterhead. After Brandon's conviction and Trinity's father's arrest in Monaco, the hospital had been desperate to rebuild its reputation. My idea for a program supporting ethical practices and whistleblower protection had landed on receptive ears. Have you told Sandra yet? Helen asked. She's already planning the launch event. I smiled, remembering my friend's excitement. She says we need to make it big. Show everyone that things really have changed here. Speaking of change, Helen nodded toward the hospital entrance, where Eduardo was leading a tour group of new residents. He's doing well as chief of surgery. Better than well? I agreed. The nurses actually smile during rounds now. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Brandon's sentencing had been announced. 5 years with possibility of parole. Part of his plea deal included testifying against Trinity's father's entire network. You're not reading that, are you? Helen reached across and gently pushed my phone face down. Old habits, I admitted. But you're right. That chapter's over. Ms. Mitchell? A young woman approached our table, clutching a medical textbook. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. Your testimony at the medical board hearings, it inspired me to report misconduct at my previous hospital. I recognized her then, Maria's younger sister, Rachel. How did that go? They're investigating now. She straightened her shoulders. I was scared at first, but then I thought about what you said about courage being contagious. After Rachel left, Helen raised an eyebrow. Courage is contagious? I might have gotten a bit passionate during my speech. I laughed. But it's true, isn't it? Look at what happened here. First, Maria and the nurses spoke up, then Trinity, then Brandon. Then the entire corrupt system came tumbling down, Helen finished, like dominoes. Dr. Graham? Eduardo approached, his tour group hovering nearby. Would you mind speaking to our new residents about the mentorship program? Helen stood, squeezing my shoulder as she passed. Coming right up. I watched as she addressed the group, her silver hair catching the sunlight. The new residents leaned forward, hanging on her every word as she described the changes we'd implemented. Anonymous reporting systems, ethical oversight committees, support networks for staff. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Sandra. Turn on the news now. I pulled up the local news website to find Trinity's father's face splashed across the screen. He'd been found dead in his Monaco hotel room. Apparent suicide. The authorities had discovered evidence linking him to drug trafficking operations in 3 other hospitals. Everything okay? Helen had returned, noting my expression. It's really over now. I showed her the article. The last domino. She sat back down, her face thoughtful. You know, when you first came to my office with that USB drive, I thought you were just another angry ex-wife looking for revenge. I was, I admitted, but somewhere along the way, it became about something bigger. It became about justice, she corrected, about doing what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. A group of nurses walked past, waving to us. Among them were Maria, Rachel, and Diane, all now supervisors in their departments, their careers flourishing in the hospital's new environment. The first class of mentees starts next week, I said, changing the subject. 20 women from different departments, all interested in healthcare administration and ethics. And you'll be leading them, Helen smiled. From bitter ex-wife to whistleblower to program director, quite a journey. I thought about that journey, about the night of my graduation party, about the anger that had driven me to investigate Brandon, about the unexpected allies I'd found along the way. The revenge I'd sought had transformed into something far more meaningful. You know what's funny? I gathered my things, preparing to head to my new office. Brandon always said I was wasting my potential at that community college. Turns out, he was right about the potential part, just wrong about everything else. Helen stood with me. Ready for your first day as director? I looked around the hospital courtyard, at the medical students chasing their dreams, at the nurses walking tall with newfound confidence, at Eduardo teaching his residents about integrity as much as medicine. Actually, I smiled. I think I've been ready for this my whole life. As we walked into the hospital, I didn't see the shadows of my past anymore. Instead, I saw possibility. The possibility of change, of growth, of making a difference, not through revenge or destruction, but through building something new, something better, something that would last.